if you want to understand what happened last week with the city of Detroit, I think this is a great place to start and a good sort of thumbnail history of what happened in the city. It's 5 articles. There's a 6th part actually that will come along, but it just gives you a sense of the rise and the fall and how exactly it got to the point where it is today. The first part looks at the unionization of the Ford Motor Company in the 1940s, which Detroit had been the automobile capital of America for more than 2 decades by that point, but this really sort of represented a turning point in the sort of character and politics and economy of the city. From there, the story moves on to basically the glory period of the American automobile industry and the city and the state of Michigan in the 1950s, sort of humorously looking back at the infamous comment by General Motors, a chairman, that what's good for America is good for GM. The quote is sometimes taken a little bit out of context, but it's very, I think, apropos and reflective of the mindset that was in the country and in business and the automobile industry and the state in particular. From there, we started looking at the actual decline of the city in the industry. In the late 80s, early 90s, as foreign competition became increasingly a factor for them to deal with, and Detroit not really knowing how to deal with it. The third part of the series begins with a very infamous crime that occurred in 1982, the murder of Vincent Chin by 2 men. One of whom was a former Chrysler plant supervisor. They literally just saw Mr. Chin as he was walking out of his bachelor party with some friends, mistook him for Japanese, and assaulted him and beat him in the head until he died. It turned out that Mr. Chin was not Japanese, he was Chinese, and in fact was a automobile worker himself. So he was actually in the same boat that they were. But it's sort of the terrible, tragic incident sort of serves as a flashpoint for both the decline and I think the shock that it occurred to the region as that happened. The 4th part looks at the automobile industry bailout in 2008, how they came basically hat in hand to the federal government seeking money at the very end of the George W. Bush administration, were rebuffed because, again, they didn't quite understand the gravity of what they were asking for. The 3 automobile industry executives flew to Washington, D.C. in their private jets to request a bailout, which, when the news got out, didn't go over very well. And then the 5th part looks at how the state's recent right-to-work election vote. This was basically a reaction. It had been pushed for years by various libertarian, free market, conservative groups in the state, but never had really gotten much traction. It seemed impossible with the home of one of the historic homes of the union in organized labor in America. But by this time, the workforces had shrunk to such a point, and the city had shrunk to such a point, that they didn't really represent the same number of people that they did. And when they attempted in the 2012 election to head off any possible unionization by amending the state constitution, their attempt to amend it not only failed, it failed so badly it inspired the Republicans in the state and Governor Rick Snyder to eventually follow along to pass a right-to-work law. And that sort of encapsulates the history of Detroit going from, in 1941, a city, that was primarily one industry, and an industry that was became synonymous with organized labor, to a city that where the automobile industry was basically a shell of itself, and now one where organized labor lacked the power to protect even what it had obtained up to that point.